Folake Omisanya hurried down the busy hallway of the Grand Crystal Hotel, clutching her cleaning cart with trembling hands. Her hair was tied in a loose bun, strands escaping around her face. Her uniform bore stains from hours of non-stop work, evidence of double shifts that had become her new normal. She hadn't slept properly in days. Her younger brother's hospital bills were mounting, each one a reminder of how little time they might have left. Every shift felt like climbing a mountain with no summit in sight. She glanced at her checklist, squinting under the fluorescent lights. Next up, Presidential Suite 1503. The holiday season had brought an influx of wealthy guests to Lagos, and the hotel was operating at full capacity. Christmas decorations glittered throughout the corridors, golden wreaths, silver bells, twinkling lights, but Folake barely noticed them anymore. Beauty had become background noise when survival demanded all your attention. Meanwhile, Kehinde Adeleke stepped out of his luxury car and into the cool marble lobby of the same hotel. The young tech billionaire had flown in from Dubai for high-stakes negotiations that could determine the future of his latest artificial intelligence venture. Investors were waiting, millions of dollars hung in the balance, but his mood was foul. His private jet had been delayed for hours. His assistant had somehow mixed up his entire schedule. And now, incredibly, his suite wasn't ready. He could feel his patience, already one thing, fraying completely. As he marched down the hallway, phone pressed to his ear, backing orders to someone on the other end, fate decided to intervene. Folake, lost in exhaustion and the rhythm of her walk, didn't hear him coming. She turned the corner with her mop bucket just as Kehinde stormed around the same bend, his attention completely absorbed by his phone call. Crash! Dirty water splashed onto Kehinde's designer shoes and the hem of his crisp white shirt. The phone slipped from his hand, clattering onto the marble floor. For a moment, everything stopped. The world seemed to hold its breath. Folake gasped, her eyes going wide with panic. Oh no! Oh my God, sir! I'm so sorry! Kehinde's sharp eyes narrowed dangerously. Do you even know what you've just done? He growled, his voice cold steel, in a way that was somehow worse than shouting. I didn't see you. Please forgive me, Folake stammered, her whole body beginning to tremble. Hotel staff members turned to watch, some covering their mouths, others whispering to each other. Everyone knew who Kehinde Adeleke was. Everyone knew what his displeasure could mean. Kehinde's voice was cold steel. This suit cost more than you make in a year, possibly 2. Humiliation burned through Folake's chest like fire. She lowered her head, unable to meet his gaze. It was an accident, sir. I truly didn't mean... But Kehinde didn't respond. He simply stepped past her, water dripping from his clothes, his jaw set in a hard line of fury. Back in his suite, as he changed into fresh clothes, he muttered under his breath, This entire trip is cursed. His hands shook slightly as he buttoned his shirt, not from the incident itself, but from the accumulated stress of everything going wrong. Little did he know, the girl who had just ruined his expensive suit would soon turn his carefully controlled life completely upside down. Folake walked the rest of her shift with trembling hands and a lump in her throat that refused to go away. The staff whispers followed her everywhere, a constant hum of judgment and schadenfreude. Girl, you splashed water on Kehinde Adeleke. Are you trying to get yourself fired? I heard he was furious, absolutely furious. She's done for. Might as well pack her bags now. But Folake couldn't afford to worry about gossip. Her brother Segun was running out of medicine. The doctors had made it clear that without consistent treatment, his condition would deteriorate rapidly. She had to keep this job no matter what, no matter the cost to her dignity. That evening, she was assigned to clean the upper floors again. Her supervisor, a stern woman named Mrs. Balogun, handed her a room card without making eye contact. Suite 1503. The guest has stepped out for dinner. Be quick and be thorough. And Folake, she finally looked up, her expression hard. Don't mess up again. Folake nodded silently, took a deep breath and rode the elevator alone with her thoughts spiraling. She still hadn't realized it was the same suite from the earlier collision, The numbers on the card hadn't registered through her exhaustion and anxiety. Inside, the presidential suite was vast and modern, decorated with tasteful Christmas touches. A small tree in the corner with white lights, elegant garlands along the windows. The space was lit only by the fading sunset streaming through floor-to-ceiling glass walls that overlooked the Lagos skyline. The city sparkled below like scattered diamonds. Folake moved quietly through the rooms, wiping surfaces until they gleamed, fluffing pillows with practiced efficiency, straightening everything to perfection. But her legs ached deeply. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep. Her whole body felt like it was made of lead. When she reached the master bedroom with its enormous bed covered in what looked like clouds of white linens, her body simply gave up. Just a few minutes, she told herself, sitting carefully on the very edge of the bed, just to rest my eyes for a moment. She never meant to fall asleep. She never meant to let her guard down. But exhaustion is a powerful force, and it pulled her under like a tide she couldn't fight. Kehinde returned late that night, more irritated and exhausted than before. The business dinner had gone worse than he could have imagined. The investors had been distracted, unimpressed, asking questions that revealed they hadn't even read his proposal. His carefully prepared presentation had fallen flat. His mood was even darker than it had been that morning. He pushed open the door to his suite, loosened his tie with one hand, and froze mid-step. Someone was in his bed. Not a thief, not some overeager fan who'd somehow gotten past security. A hotel cleaner, fast asleep, curled up on his sheets like she belonged there, a feather duster still loosely gripped in her hand. His eyes widened in disbelief. What the hell? He stormed across the room and grabbed her shoulder, shaking it roughly. Wake up! What are you? No, I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't mean to. Please don't. Kehinde's voice sliced through her panic like a blade. What are you doing in my bed? Are you insane? Tears welled instantly in her eyes, spilling over before she could stop them. I was so tired. I'm sorry. I didn't even realize I'd fallen asleep. Please don't fire me. I need this job. My brother. He froze mid-breath. Recognition clicked into place like a lock turning. Her. The same girl from the hallway. The mop water, the chaos, the trembling apology. His anger surged hot and immediate, but then something strange happened. It faltered, dimmed, because there was something in her face that stopped him cold. Not just fear, not just shame, but a bone-deep exhaustion that he recognized from his own mirror on the worst days. Real, soul-crushing tiredness that spoke of battles fought alone. Still, his pride and his anger held him rigid. Get out, he said, his voice like ice over deep water. Folake scrambled up so fast she nearly tripped over her own feet in her desperate haste to flee. She grabbed her cleaning supplies with shaking hands and rushed toward the door. The door closed behind her with a quiet thud that seemed to echo in the sudden silence.
Before we continue, we would love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Story Lounge for more inspiring African stories.
Kehinde stood there unmoving for a long moment, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, his jaw tight. Then slowly, like a man in a dream, he sat down on the edge of the bed she had just left. The sheets still held the faint warmth of her body. He sat there in the darkness, staring at nothing, asking himself a question he couldn't answer. Who is this girl, and why is she getting under my skin? Folake's heart pounded as she hurried down the hallway, her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall completely. Her legs felt like jelly by the time she reached the staff quarters. She didn't notice the curious looks from other workers, didn't register their whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when she passed. In the locker room, she dropped on a wooden bench and buried her face in her hands. Her fingers still smelled of the hotel's lemon-scented polish. Her cheeks burned with a shame so profound, it felt physical, like a weight pressing down on her chest. How could she have fallen asleep in a guest's bed? Not just any guest, Kehinde Adeleke, a billionaire, a tech genius whose face appeared on magazine covers, a VIP guest at the hotel who could have her fired with a single phone call. She was certain her career here was over, certain she'd lost the only steady income that was keeping Segun alive. Moments later, Mrs. Balogun stormed into the locker room, waving her clipboard like a weapon. "Folake, what have you done?" "I didn't mean to. I fell asleep in a billionaire's bed, in his bed. Do you know how lucky you are that he didn't call the police, that he didn't demand you be arrested? I swear it was an accident. I would never." "I don't want excuses." Mrs. Balogun's voice cracked like a whip. "He called down to the front desk. He said you are never to clean his suite again. Ever. Do you understand?" Folake nodded quickly, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, ma'am." The supervisor's expression softened slightly, confusion creeping around the edges of her anger. "He didn't fire you, though. He could have demanded you be terminated immediately, but he didn't. Count yourself lucky, girl, but don't you dare mess up again." "I understand," Folake whispered, the words sticking in her throat. That night, she didn't go straight home. Instead, she took a bus to the nearby public hospital, where her little brother lay in a bed that seemed too big for his small frame. Segun was asleep, pale and weak, his breathing shallow and labored. The machines around him beeped steadily, a rhythm that had become the soundtrack to her nightmares. She gently brushed a curl from his forehead, her own fears and humiliation pushed aside by the overwhelming love she felt for him. He was only 12 years old. He deserved so much more than this. "I'm sorry," she whispered to him, though he couldn't hear her. "I'm trying. I promise I'm trying." Back at the hotel, Kehinde stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his suite, looking out at the city lights that stretched to the horizon. The Lagos skyline sparkled like shattered glass, beautiful and sharp. Christmas lights twinkled from buildings throughout the city, reminding him that the world continued to celebrate while his mind remained stuck on one inexplicable moment. He had tried to forget her, that strange, quiet girl who had disrupted his day twice in ways that should have meant nothing. First with the water, then with her presence in his private space, vulnerable and exhausted in a way that spoke of deeper struggles. But he couldn't stop thinking about her. Who works so hard they literally pass out, he wondered, staring at his own reflection in the dark glass. What kind of life drives someone to that point? He opened his tablet and pulled up a financial report, determined to focus on something concrete, something he could control and understand. But the numbers didn't make sense anymore. They blurred together meaninglessly. Kehinde closed the tablet with more force than necessary, leaned back against the leather sofa and closed his eyes. "There's something about her," he muttered to the empty room, something he didn't understand and didn't particularly want to feel. Not yet, not when his life was complicated enough already. But the thought persisted, unwelcome and insistent. "She looked at me like I was just another person, not like I was Kehinde Adeleke, billionaire tech genius, just like I was a person who had scared her." And somehow, that look had shaken something loose inside him that he hadn't even known was stuck. The next morning, Folake arrived early for her shift, her eyes heavy from another sleepless night spent worrying and praying. She braced herself for more whispers, more shame, more sideways glances from co-workers who were probably already spreading the story throughout the entire hotel staff. But to her surprise, something strange happened. The hotel staff acted unusually quiet around her. No teasing, no giggles, no pointed questions. In fact, most of them actively avoided making eye contact with her altogether. It wasn't until she reached the back service kitchen that Mrs. Balogun approached her again, this time with a puzzled, almost suspicious expression. "You've been specially requested," she said slowly, as if the words didn't make sense even as she spoke them. Folake blinked in confusion. "What? Requested for what?" "Room service, suite 1503. Mr. Adeleke asked for you by name. Folake's face drained from blood. Her stomach dropped. Why would he? The supervisor shrugged, but her eyes were sharp with curiosity and perhaps a hint of warning. Your guess is as good as mine. Just deliver the breakfast tray and come right back. And Folake, lower your voice. Behave yourself. Whatever is happening here, don't make it worse. Minutes later, Folake stood outside the door of the suite that haunted her thoughts. Her hands trembled as she balanced the heavy silver tray. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and knocked gently. Kehinde opened the door himself. He wasn't wearing a business suit. Instead, his shirt sleeves were rolled up, his hair slightly tousled, and there was something different in his expression. Something less sharp, less angry. He looked less like an untouchable billionaire and more like a man who hadn't slept well either. Come in, he said simply, stepping aside. Folake stepped in quietly, keeping her eyes trained on the floor, her heart pounding so loud she was certain he could hear it. She placed the tray down carefully on the glass table, her movements precise and controlled, despite her trembling hands. I'm sorry again, she said softly, the words automatic. For yesterday, for everything. Kehinde didn't answer immediately. He poured himself a cup of coffee with steady hands, then paused. You didn't get fired. No, sir. You're lucky. Yes, sir. I swallowed hard. Very lucky. Then silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable, until he spoke again, his voice different somehow, less harsh, more genuinely curious. What's your name? She hesitated, surprised by the question. Folake Omisanya. He looked at her for a long moment, really looked at her, and she felt exposed under that gaze in a way that had nothing to do with judgment. Do you always work this hard, Folake? He asked quietly. Her eyes darted up to meet his, confusion clear on her face. Yes, sir, I don't have much of a choice. Kehinde nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he had suspected. That much is clear. He picked up a small white envelope from the table beside him and held it out toward her. For you, he said. Folake hesitated, her hands hovering uncertainly. Sir, I can't accept. It's just a tip, he interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. Take it. She took the envelope with shaking fingers, not opening it, just holding it like it might explode. Thank you, sir, she whispered. You can go, he said, turning back to the window. She left quickly, closing the door softly behind her. In the hallway, alone, she finally opened the envelope. Her breath caught in her throat. 100,000 naira. More than her entire month's salary. More money than she had seen in one place in years. She stared at the crisp bills, her heart pounding, her mind racing with a single overwhelming question. Why is he doing this? And what does he want in return? Later, in the staff locker room, Folake sat alone on the bench with the envelope beside her, still unopened after she'd counted the money once more to make sure she hadn't imagined it. The money could save everything. Segun's medicine for months, groceries for weeks, maybe even a small cushion for emergencies. But her pride whispered warnings in the back of her mind. Nothing comes for free, not from people like him. Rich men don't give money without expecting something back. Still, as she sat there, thinking of her brother's pale face, his labored breathing, the desperate look in the doctor's eyes when he said they were running out of time, she made up her mind. She would keep the money. She would use it to help Segun, but she would earn it too. She would work harder than she ever had before. She would prove she wasn't someone who took charity without deserving it. And maybe, just maybe, she would figure out what Kehinde Adeleke really wanted from a poor hotel cleaner who had nothing to offer him except her label and her honesty. Back at the hotel, word spread quickly among the staff. Whispers multiplied like wildfire. Did you hear? He called for her again. What does he see in her? She's just a cleaner. Maybe she's pretty when she's cleaned up. Or maybe she's smart enough to see an opportunity. One waitress muttered loudly enough for others to hear. Some girls will do anything to get ahead. But Folake ignored them all. She had learned long ago that people will always find something to gossip about, especially when they see someone else getting something they don't have. Jealousy was easier than empathy. That afternoon, just as she was finishing her round on the 3rd floor, she was called again. "Suite 1503, Mrs. Balogun said, her eyes sharp and questioning. "He asked for you specifically, again." Folake's heart thudded painfully against her ribs, but she nodded and walked toward the elevator with as much dignity as she could gather. This time, when Kehinde greeted her at the door, he was holding a cup of tea, not coffee, tea, delicate and fragrant. "You are not scared of me anymore?" he asked, and there was something almost like amusement in his voice. "I'm still trying to understand you," Folake replied honestly, surprising herself with her own boldness. He motioned toward the seating area by the window, where the afternoon sunlight streamed in, golden and warm. "Sit." Folake hesitated, every instinct telling her this was inappropriate, that she shouldn't, that there were boundaries between people like her and people like him. But something in his expression, not commanding but inviting, made her move forward. She perched carefully on the edge of an elegant chair, her posture stiff and uncertain. "Tell me something," Kehinde said, settling into the chair across from her. "If you weren't cleaning hotel rooms, what would you be doing?" Folake blinked, completely caught off guard. No one had ever asked her that. No one had ever wondered about her dreams, her desires, the life she might have wanted instead of the one she had. She started, then stopped, gathering her courage. "I wanted to study nursing, to help people who are sick, like my brother." Her voice grew softer. "But life got in the way." Kehinde nodded slowly, saying nothing, his expression thoughtful. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable this time. "Why are you being kind to me?" Folake finally asked, the question that had been burning in her mind since the money, since the second summons, since everything stopped making sense. He turned toward her fully, his dark eyes serious and strangely vulnerable. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe because I finally noticed someone real, someone who doesn't want anything from me except to be left alone to do her job." Silence hung between them, heavy with meaning neither of them fully understood yet. Then, just as suddenly as the conversation had begun, he stood. "You can go." Folake rose quickly, confused by the abrupt dismissal. "Okay, thank you, sir." As she reached the door, his voice stopped her. "Folake." She paused, hand on the doorknob, and looked back. "Next time, call me Kehinde." She stared at him for a moment, her heart doing something strange in her chest, then nodded once and stepped into the hallway. The door clicked shut behind her. Folake exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her heart raced, her hands trembled. She didn't understand what was happening between them, but something fundamental had shifted. He'd given her his name, not his title, not his position, but his actual name. An invitation to see him as human, not just as the untouchable billionaire sweet she clinged. And despite all her instincts warning her to be careful, to protect herself, to remember her place, she couldn't deny the small, dangerous spark of hope beginning to glow somewhere deep in her chest. Folake returned home that night with fresh bread in one hand and the precious envelope hidden safely in her pocket. The journey from the hotel to their small rented room took over an hour by bus, but she barely noticed the time. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying conversations, analyzing tones, trying to understand what was happening to her carefully ordered, survival-focused life. Her younger brother Segun sat up weakly on their thin mattress when she entered, his eyes lighting up despite his obvious exhaustion. "You bought the good kind," he said, grinning at the bread despite the cough that immediately followed, harsh and wet. She smiled, ruffled his hair gently, and settled beside him. Today was strange. He chewed slowly, savoring each bite like it was a feast. Strange good or strange bad? I don't know yet. She didn't mention the billionaire, didn't talk about the whispers, the judgment, the impossible situation developing. Just that someone had tipped Hang more generously than she'd expected, and they'd have money for his medicine for a while. Segun didn't press for details. He never did. At 12 years old, he had learned to not ask questions that might have answers too painful to hear. Folake looked around their small cluttered room, peeling walls decorated with his crayon drawings, a cracked window covered with cardboard, a bucket strategically placed to catch water from a persistent leak in the ceiling. The entire world could fit in a space smaller than Kehinde's bathroom. But tonight, they had bread and hope and medicine money. Sometimes that had to be enough. Back at the Grand Crystal Hotel, Kehinde stood on the balcony of his suite, his untouched dinner growing cold on the table behind him. The city lights flickered like stars that had fallen to earth and gotten trapped in concrete and glass. Christmas decorations throughout Lagos created patterns of red and green against the darkness. His assistant had called earlier, voice professional but confused. "Sir, should I book your return flight to Dubai? The deal here is essentially complete." Kehinde had paused, looking out at the night, and made a decision he couldn't fully explain. "No, extend the suite reservation indefinitely." "Sir, you heard me. Just do it." "For how long, sir?" "Until I say otherwise." His assistant had fallen silent, clearly wanting to ask questions, but knowing better. "Yes, sir. I'll handle it immediately." Now, standing alone with the Lagos night spread before him, Kehinde questioned his own judgment. This wasn't like him. He didn't linger anywhere without clear purpose. He didn't get distracted. He didn't let personal feelings interfere with business decisions. But there was something about Folake. Her quiet dignity, her fierce determination despite impossible circumstances, her refusal to grovel or manipulate even when it might have benefited her, that had gotten under his skin in a way he couldn't shake. He thought about the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she'd fallen asleep from sheer physical depletion, the trembling in her hands when she'd taken the money he'd offered. He thought about her dream of becoming a nurse, casually mentioned and then dismissed, like dreams were luxuries people like her couldn't afford. And he realized, with something close to shock, that he wanted to know more. He wanted to understand her world, her struggles, her hopes. He wanted to see behind the uniform and the fear to the person underneath. This realization should have worried him. It didn't follow any logical pattern. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't the behavior of a man who had built an empire through careful calculation and emotional distance. But for the first time in years, Kehinde found himself not caring about logic. The next day, Folake was called to suite 1503 again. Same routine, same tray, same nervous journey in the elevator. But this time, when she knocked and entered, she found Kehinde sitting near the window, reading something on his tablet, with soft music playing from his speaker. Classical music, gentle and contemplative. The Christmas tree in the corner glowed with warm white lights. "You are early," he said without looking up, but there was no criticism in his tone. "I try not to be late," Folake replied, setting the tray down with practiced care. He looked up then and pointed to the second chair by the window. "Sit, just for a minute." She hesitated, but something in his expression, not commanding but almost requesting, made her comply. They sat in silence for a while. No business talk, no questions, no expectations. Just the quiet music and the morning light streaming through the windows, casting golden patterns on the floor. Finally, Kehinde spoke, his voice quieter than she'd heard before. "What do you do when you are not working?" Folake answered honestly, too tired to pretend anymore. "Try to survive." He leaned back, studying her. "You're honest. I have no reason not to be. Something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. He smiled faintly, then picked up a second cup and poured tea from the pot on the table. Without a word, he placed it in front of her. Folake stared at it. No one had ever served her before. She was the one serving, cleaning, providing. The simple gesture felt impossibly significant. She lifted the cup carefully, inhaling the delicate fragrance, and sipped slowly. The tea was perfect, warm, slightly sweet, comforting in a way she hadn't experienced in longer than she could remember. And for the first time since this strange situation had begun, the silence between them didn't feel awkward. It felt safe. Like maybe, impossibly, they were beginning to understand each other. Later that day, as Folake walked through the staff hallway, she felt the warmth of that shared silence still lingering in her chest, like the memory of the tea. At her locker, she found a folded note stuck between her cleaning gloves. Her name was written on the outside in handwriting she was beginning to recognize. With trembling fingers, she unfolded it. Meet me by the fountain in the hotel garden after your shift, please. K. Her hands shook as she read it again and again. Her first instinct was to tear it up, throw it away, forget it ever existed. This was dangerous. This was inappropriate. This could only lead to heartbreak and complications she couldn't afford. But she didn't destroy the note. Instead, she folded it carefully and tucked it into her pocket, where it seemed to burn against her hip like a secret promise she hadn't agreed to keep. That night, after her shift ended and the other workers had gone home, Folake found herself standing by the hotel garden fountain. The December air was warm and humid, typical for Lagos even during the holiday season. Christmas lights twinkled in the surrounding trees like captured fireflies. Kehinde was already there waiting. He wasn't wearing his usual business attire, no expensive suit, no designer watch, no air of untouchable wealth. Just a simple grey sweater and dark jeans. He looked younger somehow, more approachable, almost vulnerable. You came, he said softly, and he could hear relief in his voice. I don't know why, Folake replied, keeping her distance, maintaining the safety of space between them. He looked at her carefully, his expression serious. Do you trust me? No, she answered honestly, but I don't think you are pretending either. Kehinde gave a small nod, his expression unreadable in the dim light. I want to understand your world better. I want to see where you live, how you live. Not to judge, just to understand. She blinked, completely shocked. Why? Because I don't want to just imagine anymore. I don't want to make assumptions based on my own privileged perspective. Silence stretched between them, filled with the gentle sound of water and distant city traffic. Then, Folake said, her voice barely above a whisper, I don't bring people there. My home is not like yours. I'm not asking you to impress me, Kehinde said, stepping closer but still respecting the distance she maintained. She looked away, her voice cracking slightly. Most people like you don't try to understand people like me. I'm not most people. The words hung in the air between them, a challenge and a promise wrapped together. She met his gaze, and in that moment that felt longer than it was, she saw something in his eyes that she hadn't expected. Genuine curiosity, not pity. Interest, not condescension. A desire to connect that seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. Finally, softly, making a decision that terrified her, she said, Fine, tomorrow, after my shift. He smiled, not the arrogant, confident smile of a billionaire, but something softer and more uncertain, something real. Thank you, he said quietly. As Folake walked home that night, her thoughts were a storm of confusion, hope, and fear. What was she doing? This man lived in skyscrapers. She lived behind broken fences. He spoke in billions. She counted coins carefully. He flew in private jets. She took crowded buses that broke down. They were from different worlds, not just economically, but experientially. What could possibly come from this except disappointment and pain? But something about the way he looked at her, the way he'd said thank you, like he meant it, like her agreement actually mattered to him. It made her feel something she'd forgotten was possible. It made her feel seen. And despite all her survival instincts screaming warnings, despite every rational thought telling her to protect herself, she couldn't deny the dangerous warmth growing in her chest. For once in her difficult life, someone was choosing to see her, not as a servant, not as a problem, not as someone beneath notice, just as a person worth knowing. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Folake couldn't eat. Her stomach churned too much to hold anything down. She moved through her cleaning duties mechanically, her mind elsewhere, rehearsing conversations, imagining scenarios, alternating between hope and dread. After her shift, she changed into her plainest but cleanest dress, a simple blue cotton one she'd bought years ago that still fit reasonably well. She combed her hair carefully, borrowed a small amount of her roommate's lotion to soften her work-roughened hands, and wore the sandals with the least visible wear. When she stepped outside into the late afternoon sun, Kehinde was already waiting by the hotel parking lot, leaning against a sleek black SUV with tinted windows. True to his word from the night before, he wasn't wearing anything obviously expensive. Just a simple button-down shirt and dark slacks, no flashy jewelry, no obvious displays of wealth. He smiled gently when he saw her, and she noticed he seemed almost as nervous as she felt. "Ready?" he asked. Folake hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. The drive across Lagos was quiet at first. She noticed he didn't speak until she did, giving her space to process, respecting her obvious discomfort. Finally, she broke the silence. "This is the longest drive I've ever taken with a stranger." "Maybe we're not strangers anymore," Kehinde said softly. She glanced at him, studying his profile as he navigated the chaotic Lagos traffic with surprising ease. "We are still from different worlds, Kehinde. Worlds can overlap. They don't have to stay separate." They reached her neighborhood just after sunset. The street lights flickered weakly, struggling to illuminate the narrow roads. Children played in the dusty street, their laughter cutting through the constant hum of generators that provided backup power to the area. Small shops with handwritten signs sold everything from phone credit to kerosene. The smell of cooking fires and street food filled the air. Kehinde stepped out of the SUV without hesitation, without the slightest hint of judgment or discomfort on his face. "You don't have to," Folake began. "I want to," Kehinde interrupted gently. They walked slowly toward her building, the street narrowing as they went. A few neighbors peered through windows and doorways, curiosity evident on their faces. Some whispered to each other, pointing discreetly at the expensive car parked at the street entrance. "This is home," Folake said softly, as they approached a weathered building with peeling paint and a rusted sheet metal door with a bent handle. Kehinde stood quietly as she unlocked it with a key tied to a piece of string she wore around her neck. Inside, the room was exactly as she described it. Small, worn, but meticulously clean and organized. Segun looked up from where he sat on their thin mattress, his eyes going wide with shock. "Folake, who is that?" he asked in a loud whisper. Folake knelt beside him, smoothing his hair gently. A friend, someone who wanted to visit. Kehinde stepped forward and waved. "Hi, Segun. I'm Kehinde." Segun's eyes grew even wider with recognition. "Wait, are you the tech guy? The one from the magazines? The one who invented that new phone app?" Kehinde laughed, genuine and warm. "Maybe. You follow technology?" "When I can, when I'm feeling good enough." Segun's enthusiasm was dimmed by the cough that followed, harsh and painful to hear. They didn't stay long. Kehinde understood instinctively not to overstay, not to push. He just stood near the window, watching carefully how Folake tucked the go in with practiced care, how she straightened their tiny space like it mattered more than any palace, how she spoke to her brother with such tenderness and fierce protection. He saw the medicine bottles lined up carefully, the hospital bills stacked in order of urgency, the calendar marking appointment dates. He saw a life lived on the absolute edge, where one wrong step meant disaster. On the drive back, neither of them spoke for a long time. The city lights began to glow as darkness fell completely, and Christmas decorations sparkled throughout Lagos, a sharp contrast to the neighborhood they had just left. Finally, as they approached the hotel, Kehinde glanced at her and said quietly, "Thank you for showing me your world." Folake looked out the window. "It's not much." "It's real," he said firmly. "That's more than I can say for mine most of the time." She turned to look at him then, really look at him, and saw something in his expression that took her breath away. Not pity, not charity, but respect. Genuine, deep respect. "You said most people in your position would have judged," she said softly. "I'm not most people," he repeated the words from the night before, "and you deserve better than judgment." That night, Folake lay awake in the darkness, listening to Segun's labor breathing beside her, staring at the cracked ceiling where moonlight leaked through gaps in the roof. For the first time in years, her exhaustion felt different, lighter somehow. Because someone had seen her world, the broken parts, the struggling parts, the barely holding together parts, and he hadn't turned away. He had simply stood there, witnessed it, and treated her the same afterward. And that, she realized, was perhaps the most valuable gift anyone had ever given her. The gift of being fully seen without being diminished. The days that followed blurred together in a way that felt both dreamlike and intensely real. Kehinde continued to call for Folake, but the pretense of room service gradually faded. Sometimes she would arrive to find him waiting with questions about her life, her brother, her dreams. Other times, they would simply sit together in comfortable silence, watching Lagos transform through the windows as day became night. The hotel staff noticed, of course. Whispers grew louder and more pointed. "She's spending hours in his suite now? What could they possibly be talking about? She's just lucky, that's all. It won't last. Girls like that always fall eventually. They think they're special, but they're not." One particularly cruel rumor suggested she was manipulating him, using her brother's illness to gain sympathy and extract money. Another claimed she'd seduced him deliberately, calculated every move. Folake heard them all, and they hurt. Each whispered judgment was like a small cut, accumulating until she felt covered in wounds no one else could see. But she didn't respond, not with words, not with anger, not with tears. Instead, she worked harder than ever, kept her head down, and reminded herself that she knew the truth, even if no one else did. Meanwhile, Kehinde found himself increasingly distracted during his business obligations. His focus, usually razor-sharp, kept drifting. During conference calls, he found his mind wandering to conversations with Folake. During investor presentations, he caught himself checking his phone for messages that weren't there. His closest friend and business partner, Toby, finally confronted him one evening over drinks at the hotel bar. "What's going on with you?" Toby asked bluntly. "You've been different since you extended your stay here." "Nothing is going on," Kehinde said automatically. "That's a lie, and we both know it." Toby leaned forward. "I've known you for 15 years. You don't extend business trips indefinitely. You don't turn down lucrative deals. You don't lose focus. So what or who is keeping you in Lagos?" Kehinde was silent for a long moment, swirling the whiskey in his glass. Finally, he admitted, "I met someone." Toby's eyebrows rose. "The cleaner? The one everyone is talking about?" "People are talking." Kehinde's voice went cold. "Of course they are talking. A billionaire and a hotel cleaner is the kind of story people can't resist." Toby paused. "But I'm asking you seriously. Is this real, or is this just, I don't know, a moment of curiosity that's going to blow up in both of your faces?" "It's real," Kehinde said quietly. "Or at least it's becoming real." "And your mother?" Kehinde's jaw tightened. He hadn't thought that far ahead. Or rather, he'd been deliberately avoiding thinking about it. "What about her?" You know what I'm asking? She has specific expectations for your life. Always has. A hotel cleaner wasn't on the approved list. I'm 32 years old, Kehinde said firmly. I don't need her approval. No, to be agreed, but you are going to deal with her disapproval. Are you ready for that? More importantly, is she ready for that? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Because Kehinde didn't know. He didn't know if what was growing between him and Folake was strong enough to withstand the storm that would inevitably come when his world and hers collided more publicly. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He didn't want to let her go. Not yet, maybe not ever. Then came the necklace. Kehinde had seen it during a rare moment when he'd forced himself to attend to personal business, buying a birthday gift for his mother, inophically enough. The jewelry store was full of expensive, elaborate pieces, but one item caught his eye. A thin silver chain, simple and elegant. No diamond, no unnecessary embellishment, just pure, clean lines that somehow reminded him of Folake, understated but beautiful, strong but delicate. He bought it without overthinking, without planning what it meant. But when he returned to the hotel, he realized that he couldn't just hand it to her. That would make it a transaction, a gift with implications and expectations. He wanted it to be something else, a gesture, not a statement. So he placed it in a small velvet box and left it tucked beneath the folded laundry in the service room, in the cubby he knew was hers. No note, no signature, no words to complicate what was meant to be simple. When Folake found it the next morning, her breath caught in her throat. She opened the box slowly, almost afraid of what she might find. The silver chain shimmered softly in the fluorescent light of the service room, catching and reflecting like captured moonlight. She didn't need a note. She didn't need to ask. She already knew who had left it, and more importantly, she understood what it meant. Not ownership, not obligation, but a quiet acknowledgement that something was growing between them that neither of them fully understood yet. That evening, she wore it beneath her uniform, hidden from view. The cool metal against her skin felt like a secret, a connection, a promise she wasn't ready to name out loud. The next morning, when she brought breakfast to Kehinde's suite, he noticed immediately. The chain peeked out from her collar for just a moment as she bent to set down the tray. She caught him looking. Their eyes met. Neither of them mentioned it. Neither needed to. But they shared a look, quiet, steady, full of meaning that said everything neither of them could articulate yet. And in that moment, standing in a hotel suite, with the Lagos morning light streaming through the windows, something fundamentally shifted between them. They still didn't touch, still didn't speak explicitly of feelings or futures, but both knew with absolute certainty that they were standing at the edge of something deep and potentially life-changing. And despite all the logical reasons to step back, to protect themselves, to acknowledge the impossibility of their situation, neither one of them wanted to retreat. They were falling, slowly, carefully, terrifyingly, and for the first time in both their carefully controlled lives, neither one of them wanted to stop. 3 weeks passed in a strange, suspended bubble of time. To the outside world, Kehinde Adeleke remained the polished billionaire with a sharp mind and reputation for emotional distance. But inside Suite 1503, something had fundamentally shifted. Every knock from Folake, and they came often now, sometimes with legitimate work purposes, sometimes with none at all, chipped away at walls Kehinde had spent years constructing. Every shared cup of tea, every quiet conversation, every moment of comfortable silence dismantled his carefully maintained defenses. And every time he looked at her, really looked at her, he saw someone extraordinary, someone who never asked for his money, his influence, or his world. She asked only for his honesty, his genuine self. That was rarer and more valuable than anything wealth could buy. Then the storm arrived. It came in designer heels and a tailored suit. Mrs. Fumi Adeleke, Kehinde's mother, flew into Lagos without warning on a private jet. Tall, elegant, and formidable, she stepped into the Grand Crystal Hotel lobby with 2 assistants, 3 pieces of designer luggage, and a gaze sharp enough to cut through steel. She didn't need to book a room. She wanted answers. Kehinde was in a video conference meeting when she barged into suite 1503. The staff had scrambled, but no one had been brave enough or foolish enough to stop her. She looked around the suite with a practiced assessing eye. Everything seemed normal at first, elegant, expensive, familiar, but then she noticed details that didn't fit. A food tray with 2 cups, both recently used, a faint floral scent that definitely wasn't his cologne, a strand of an unfamiliar hair on the sofa pillow. Her eyes narrowed. "Is there a woman?" she asked without preamble. When Kehinde's meeting ended, Kehinde, to his credit, didn't lie. He also didn't confirm. He simply said, "Mother, I wasn't expecting you." Clearly, her tone was dry. "You've been in Lagos for over a month. You've turned down 3 major deals. You've extended your hotel stay indefinitely, and you've stopped returning my calls with more than 1-word text messages." "I've been busy." "Doing what exactly?" She gestured around the suite. "This doesn't look like work." Kehinde met his eyes steadily. "I'm allowed to take time for myself. Not when investors are asking questions, not when your board is getting nervous, not when you are behaving completely out of character. So I'll ask again, is there a woman?" He didn't answer, which was of course an answer in itself. Mrs. Adeleke's expression shifted from suspicious to calculating. "I see," she said softly. "Well then, I suppose I'll have to see for myself what or who has captured my son's attention so completely." And from that moment, she began watching, waiting, investigating with the practiced skill of someone who had spent decades in high society, where information was currency and knowledge was power. 2 days later, standing near the hotel lobby's marble balcony, Mrs. Adeleke saw it. Her son, the untouchable Kehinde Adeleke, the man who had built a tech empire through ruthless focus and emotional discipline, paused. Not for a phone call, not for a business associate, not for anyone from his world. He paused to smile. At a hotel cleaner, a young woman in a sky blue uniform with quiet eyes and a tray in her hands. The woman said something Mrs. Adeleke couldn't hear. Kehinde laughed, actually laughed, genuinely and warmly, in a way her mother hadn't seen in years. That was all she needed to see. Later that evening, a folded note appeared in Folake's staff copy. This time, it wasn't from Kehinde. The paper was expensive, cream-colored, with elegant letterhead embossed at the top. The handwriting was precise and controlled. "You are invited for a private tea. Suite 2104. Tomorrow, 4:30 p.m. This is not optional. Mrs. Fumi Adeleke." Folake stared at the note, her hands beginning to tremble. Her heart sank like a stone dropped into deep water. Kehinde's mother wanted to see her, and that could only mean one thing. She didn't tell Kehinde. Some instinct told her this was something she had to face alone, that bringing him into it would only make everything more complicated and painful. When the appointed time came, Folake changed into her cleanest uniform, brushed her hair until it shone, and walked to suite 2104 with legs that felt made of air. She knocked softly. Mrs. Adeleke opened the door herself, not waiting for an assistant. She smiled, but the expression didn't reach her eyes. "Folake, isn't it?" Her voice was smooth, cultured, dangerous. "Please, come in. Let's have a talk." The suite smelled of expensive perfume and subtle power. On an ornate table sat an elaborate tea service, completely untouched and clearly arranged for show rather than use. Mrs. Adeleke motioned gracefully for Folake to sit. The chair felt like a trap. "I hear you've made quite an impression on my son," she began, pouring tea with practiced elegance. Folake kept her eyes lowered. "I didn't mean to, ma'am. Let me be very clear, Folake. I don't doubt that you are a perfectly nice girl. Hardworking, I'm sure. Probably very sweet." The woman's smile never wavered. "But you are not his equal. You are a hotel cleaner. You have nothing. No education, no family connections, no social standing, no prospects. And my son, he is destined for greatness that you cannot even begin to comprehend." She poured more tea, the liquid flowing smoothly into delicate china cups. Then she reached elegantly into her designer handbag and withdrew a thick white envelope. She placed it on the table between them with deliberate care. This contains enough money to start a completely new life, somewhere far from here, far from Lagos, far from him. Her eyes were hard despite her gentle tone. Take it, use it wisely, disappear quietly while you still have your dignity intact. Folake stared at the envelope for a long moment. The silence stretched. Then slowly, she stood up. Her voice was quiet but steady, and every word was deliberate. I came here to work, ma'am, not to beg, and certainly not to be bought. She looked directly into Mrs. Adeleke's eyes for the first time, and her gaze was clear and unflinching. I'm not manipulating your son. I'm not trying to trap him or use him or take anything from him. But I'm also not going to let you make me feel ashamed for existing in his life. She turned toward the door, leaving the envelope untouched on the table. If Kehinde wants me to leave, he can tell me himself. But I won't be dismissed by someone who doesn't know me and refuses to see me as anything more than a problem to be solved with money. And without another word, without waiting for permission or response, Folake walked out of suite 2104 with her head held high. But inside, as she rode the elevator down, as she returned to the staff quarters, as she changed mechanically into her regular clothes, something had cracked. The walls she had built to protect herself, the careful distance she had maintained, the rational understanding that this could never work, all of it fractured under the weight of Mrs. Adeleke's cold dismissal. Because no matter how strong Folake was, no matter how proud, hearing someone powerful tell you are not good enough, that you'll never be good enough, that your very existence is an obstacle to be removed, that kind of rejection cut deeper than any physical wound. That night, she didn't sleep. And the next day, everything changed.
Kehinde woke early the next morning, dressed before sunrise, and sat by the window pretending to read business reports while actually just listening. Listening for footsteps in the hallway, waiting for the familiar soft knock that had become the best part of his days. It never came. By 10 o'clock, the silence had grown too loud, too wrong. He picked up the phone and called the hotel kitchen directly. "Where is Folake?" he asked, without preamble. There was a pause, just long enough to mean something. Then a quiet, nervous voice responded, "Sir, she didn't report for her shift today." Kehinde's chest tightened painfully. "Check again." "We already did, sir. She's not here." He ended the call and immediately phoned her supervisor, Mrs. Balogun. The answer was worse than he'd feared. "She turned in her badge last night, Mr. Adeleke. Left very quietly, took her brother and a small bag. She didn't leave a forwarding address or contact information. I'm sorry, sir." Kehinde stood frozen, the phone still in his hand, staring at nothing. Gone. Just like that. No goodbye, no explanation, no message, nothing. He tore through the suites like a man possessed, searching for something, anything she might have left behind. The empty teacups from their last shared morning, the folded cloth napkins she always arranged so carefully, a tiny button near the door that must have fallen from her uniform. Her faint jasmine scent still lingered in the air, a ghost of presence that made her absence even more painful. He called her phone number, switched off. He checked with every staff member who might know something. No one knew anything. Or, if they did, they weren't saying. Later that evening, as Christmas lights began to twinkle throughout the Lagos skyline, Kehinde sat alone in the dark suite, staring out at a city that suddenly felt completely empty. His phone rang. His mother's name appeared on the screen. He answered without greeting. She didn't need to ask what was wrong. The silence in his voice conveyed everything. "I hope you've come to your senses, Kehinde," her tone gentle, but with steel underneath. This was always going to end, Kehinde. Better now than later when more damage could be done. He didn't answer. She continued, misinterpreting his silence as agreement. A man in your position doesn't build a life with a girl like that. She was never meant to stay, darling. She was a moment, an experience, not your future. His chest tightened with realization. What did you say to her? A pause. Then I reminded her of the truth, nothing more. What did you say? Each word was ice. I protected you, Kehinde. That's what mothers do. I didn't need protecting. She was just a hotel cleaner, his mother said, her voice sharpening. Have you forgotten who you are, what you represent, the responsibilities you carry? She was more real than anyone I've ever met, Kehinde said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. The line went silent. Then his mother's final words came, cold and certain. You will thank me for this eventually, when you've had time to think clearly again. Kehinde ended the call without responding, not because he was done with the conversation, but because he knew she would never, could never understand. His mother lived in a world where people were categories, where social hierarchies were immutable laws of nature, where genuine human connection was less important than maintaining proper appearances. He had lived in that world too, for most of his life, until Folake had shown him something different. That night, Kehinde drove to Folake's neighborhood, retracing the routes they'd taken together just weeks before. The Christmas decorations seemed garish now, mocking rather than celebratory. He walked to the weathered building, climbed the external stairs, and knocked on the rusted door. A neighbor, an elderly woman he vaguely remembered seeing before, stepped out from the adjacent room. They left, she said simply, before he could even ask. Late last night, the girl and her little brother. Where did they go? Kehinde's voice was desperate in a way he'd never heard himself sound. The woman shook her head slowly. Didn't say. Just carried a small bag and a sleeping child, got into a taxi and left. That's all I know. Did she leave any message, any indication of where? Nothing, sir. I'm sorry. Kehinde stood there in the dimly lit hallway for a long time, the sounds of the building, crying babies, television noise, arguments and laughter washing over him like a tide. He had lost business deals before, lost sleep over failed negotiations, lost friends who couldn't keep up with his ambition. But he had never lost something that felt this personal, this essential. This loss felt like a door shutting inside his chest in a room he hadn't known existed until Folake had opened it. And the worst part, the absolutely unbearable part, was not knowing if she'd ever come back, not knowing if his mother's words had convinced her that she truly didn't belong in his world, not knowing if he'd lost his chance at something real because he'd been too slow, too cautious, too afraid to fight for it when it mattered most. Kehinde stopped attending meetings. For the first time in his meticulously planned career, he skipped a crucial board presentation. He ignored investor calls. He cancelled speaking engagements. His team didn't understand. Investors were confused and worried. His assistant, usually unflappable, was openly panicking about the damage to his reputation. But Kehinde had only one focus now: finding Folake. He hired Lagos's most reputable private investigator, a former police detective with connections throughout the city. He paid for digital traces, checked hospitals and clinics systematically, contacted community organizations, even checked homeless shelters, though he couldn't imagine she would go there. Nothing. She had vanished as completely as smoke in wind. Each night, he returned to Suite 1503, which he still refused to give up. The hotel staff had long stopped questioning it. The room had become a shrine to something lost, filled with echoes and memories. One afternoon, his closest friend Toby came to visit, having flown in from Dubai after hearing about Kehinde's increasingly erratic behavior. She left without a word.
Kehinde said quietly, sitting on the same sofa where Folake had once sat with him, sharing tea and silence. He rubbed his temples, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "Are you sure it wasn't fear?" Toby asked tenderly. "Maybe she thought she couldn't fit into your world. Maybe she was trying to protect herself from inevitable heartbreak." "She belonged more than anyone ever has," Kehinde said, his voice breaking slightly. "Then why didn't you tell her that, clearly, explicitly?" Kehinde had no answer. He stared out at the Lagos skyline, lights beginning to glow as evening approached. "I thought I had time," he finally whispered. "I thought we were building something slowly, carefully. I thought she understood." Toby leaned forward, his expression both sympathetic and brutally honest. "Brother, love doesn't wait, not forever. And if she didn't leave you a message, it doesn't necessarily mean she was rejecting you. It might mean she was protecting herself from your world, from expectations, from judgment, from people like your mother who would never accept her." Kehinde looked at his friend, the words hitting home with painful accuracy. "So what do I do?" "You fight for her, like you fought for every business deal, every innovation, every impossible goal you've ever achieved. But this time, you're not fighting against her or her circumstances. You're fighting against the world that told her she wasn't good enough. And you have to make her believe, truly believe, that in the only world that matters, she's more than enough." That night, Kehinde drove back to Folake's old neighborhood again. The rusted door was still locked. A child's toy, a small plastic car, sat forgotten in the dust and dirt outside, a reminder of Sigun's presence. He sat on the broken concrete step for hours, phone in hand, hoping and praying for a message, a sign, anything. None came. The neighborhood moved around him, people returning from work, children being called inside for dinner, the sounds of evening life continuing as if his world hadn't completely shattered. But then, the next morning, something changed. A small envelope arrived at the hotel's front desk, hand-delivered by a motorcycle courier who disappeared before anyone could ask questions. No return address, just Kehinde's name written in handwriting he would recognize anywhere. His hand shook as he opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper, and on it, written in Folake's careful script, "You gave me hope when I had none. You made me feel seen when I had been invisible. But I can't be someone's secret or someone's project. I need to find my own strength, my own path, before I can stand beside anyone, even someone as extraordinary as you. Maybe especially someone like you. This isn't goodbye forever. It's just goodbye for now. F." Kehinde stared at the notes until the words blurred. Then he read it again and again. She was alive. She was out there somewhere. And though she had walked away, she hadn't closed the door completely. She had left it open, just a crack, just enough to let hope slip through. Now it was his turn to fight. Not for a business deal, not for an empire or investors or his reputation, but for something infinitely more valuable. The woman who had made his carefully controlled silence feel like peace. The woman who had seen past his wealth to the person underneath. The woman who had challenged everything he thought he knew about connection, purpose, and what actually mattered in life. He folded the note carefully and placed it in his wallet where it would stay until he found her again. And he would find her, no matter how long it took. 3 months passed. The world moved on as it always does. Christmas gave way to a new year and then to February with its promise of Valentine's romance. Kehinde's business empire continued to grow. His face returned to magazine covers. Forbes ran a feature article calling him the relentless visionary who never stops innovating. But none of it mattered. The note from Folake stayed folded in his wallet. He read it every night like a prayer, like a promise, like the only thing tethering him to hope. His mother had stopped calling after their last contentious conversation. His social circle had noticed his changed demeanor but knew better than to ask. His assistant had learned to work around his new habits, the long silences, the unexpected drives through Lagos neighborhoods, the distracted meetings. Then, one Saturday morning, while attending a small community technology outreach event in a town about an hour from central Lagos, an event he'd committed to months ago and couldn't cancel, something caught Kehinde's eye. Not a person, a notice board. The board was cluttered with community announcements, advertisements for local services, handwritten notices about lost pets and found items. But one flyer, slightly crumpled but clearly printed with care, stopped him in his tracks. Evening literacy classes, free for girls every Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday, 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m., St. Grace Primary School. All ages welcome. Learn to read, learn to dream. Taught by Miss Folake Omisanya. And beneath it, in smaller handwritten script, no girl should grow up unable to read. Education is freedom. Kehinde's heart stopped. Then it hammered so hard he thought it might break through his chest. Folake. He turned immediately to a young teacher standing nearby, pointing at the flyer with a trembling hand. "Do you know who this is? This teacher?" The woman's face lit up with a warm smile. "Oh, Miss Folake, yes, of course. She's wonderful with the girls." "Tell me about her, please." The teacher seemed surprised by his intensity, but continued. "She started here about 2 months ago, initially just as a part-time cleaner, helping us keep the school building maintained since we're chronically underfunded. But she noticed some of the older girls struggling with reading and started helping them after school completely on her own initiative. And now she teaches formal literacy classes 3 evenings a week. She doesn't get paid much. We can barely afford to give her anything, but she's so committed. She says no girl should grow up without learning how to read, like she almost did herself. Kehinde felt emotion tighten his throat. Is she here now? The teacher checked her watch. Not until evening, classes start at 7, but she studied him curiously. You know her? I did. I hope I still do. The teacher smiled knowingly. She always wears this delicate silver necklace. Every single day, no matter what, you'll know her when you see her. Kehinde returned to the school that evening as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. He waited quietly near the gate, his expensive car parked discreetly around the corner, his heart beating so fast he could barely breathe. Children's laughter filled the air. A chalkboard squeaked from inside the building. The smell of dust and chalk and the particular scent of a well-used school, books and pencils and young energy surrounded him. Then he saw her, standing by the classroom door. Folake held a worn book in one hand, her other hand resting gently on a little girl's shoulder as she explained something with patient care. She was smiling, not the tentative, careful smile she had worn at the hotel, but something fuller, more genuine, more free. She looked tired but peaceful, like she had found something worth the exhaustion. She was wearing a simple dress, her hair pulled back practically, and around her neck, visible even from a distance, was the silver necklace he'd given her months ago. When the last child left, chattering excitedly with her friends, Folake turned to close the classroom door, and she saw him. Her entire body froze. The book slipped slightly in her hand before she caught it. Kehinde, she breathed, her name barely audible. He stepped forward slowly, hands in his pockets, trying to appear calm despite his racing heart. Hi, Folake. She blinked rapidly, confusion and emotion warring on her face. How did you find me? He smiled gently. You taught me something important once. You said I should look past what's fancy and expensive to see what's real and meaningful. He gestured to the simple school building. I just followed the light. Folake looked down, shaking her head slowly. You shouldn't be here. I had to see you. She crossed her arms, a defensive gesture that broke his heart. You are a billionaire, Kehinde. I'm just a... Don't, he interrupted gently but firmly. Don't diminish yourself. Not to me. We're not from the same world, she said, her voice shaking slightly. Your mother made that painfully clear. My mother was wrong. She's powerful. She's right about the facts, even if she was cruel about how she said them. I don't have education, connections, social standing. I don't need her permission to care about you, Kehinde said quietly, taking another step closer. And I don't need you to fit into some predetermined idea of what my life should look like. Folake turned her face away, but not before he saw tears gathering in her eyes. You don't understand. I don't belong in your life. I don't wear designer dresses. I don't know how to act in fancy restaurants. I can't sit at your table without feeling like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not. He looked at her for a long moment, then pointed gently at her neck, at the silver necklace catching the last rays of sunset. You're still wearing it, he said softly. Her hand flew to the necklace instinctively, fingers touching it like it was precious. Your mother told me you were just curious, that I meant nothing to you, that this was just a phase, a momentary fascination with someone outside your normal world. And you believed her? I wanted to believe her. It would have been easier, less painful. But you kept the necklace, Kehinde observed gently, even when you left, even when you thought I was just playing with your feelings. Falake's voice broke. I told myself to throw it away so many times, to sell it, to leave it behind, to forget everything that happened. But I couldn't, because even when I left, even when I convinced myself it was impossible, she met his eyes finally, tears spilling over. I still loved you. Kehinde's own voice was rough with emotion, and I never stopped loving you. They stood in the gathering darkness, the sky turning from gold to deep purple behind them. The school was quiet now, empty except for the two of them and the weight of everything they'd been holding back. Finally, Folake stepped forward, closing the distance between them, her eyes wet but clear. So what now? She whispered. He reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and took her hand gently in his. Now, Kehinde said, his voice steady and sure, we write our own story. No mothers dictating terms, no social expectations defining what's possible, no titles or wealth or backgrounds that matter more than this. He squeezed her hand gently. Just us, just this, just what we build together. She looked down at their joined hands, his so carefully maintained, hers rough from work, and saw not difference but connection. I'm still scared, she admitted quietly. So am I, he said honestly, but I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. She laughed through her tears, a sound of relief and hope mixed together. And in that moment, standing outside a modest school, as stars began appearing in the Lagos sky, something settled between them. Not a resolution of all their challenges, those would still come, inevitably, but an understanding that whatever happened next, they would face it together. No more running, no more hiding, no more letting other people's limitations define their possibilities. Just two people from impossibly different worlds, choosing to build something new together. They didn't rush back to Lagos proper. For the next several weeks, Kehinde effectively relocated his life to the small town where Folake had found refuge. He rented a modest apartment nearby. He set up a temporary office with just a laptop and phone. He attended Folake's literacy classes, sitting quietly in the back, watching her teach with patience and passion. And in the quiet spaces between his business obligations and her teaching schedule, they built something neither had expected, a real relationship. Kehinde discovered things he'd never had time for before.
He walked barefoot down dusty roads with Segun, who was getting stronger with proper, consistent medical care Kehinde had quietly arranged. He helped Folake grade simple spelling tests and laughed at the creative mistakes children made. He ate meals cooked on a small stove, simple rice and beans, fried plantains, vegetables from the local market, and genuinely believed they tasted better than anything his private chef had ever prepared. He slept in a room with a shaky ceiling fan instead of central air conditioning and woke to the sound of roosters and morning prayers from a nearby mosque instead of alarm clocks. And he loved it, all of it. For her part, Folake gradually let herself believe this could be real. She allowed Kehinde to see the parts of herself she'd always hidden, the dreams too big to say out loud, the fears that woke her at night, the fierce love for her brother that drove every decision she made. And Kehinde shared his truths too, the crushing pressure of always being seen as a genius, the loneliness of wealth, the fear of failure that drove him to work 18-hour days, the hunger for genuine human connection in a world where everyone wanted something from him. At night, they sat outside under vast spreads of stars that you couldn't see in central Lagos, with crickets providing nature's soundtrack. They didn't talk about boardrooms or social hierarchies. They talked about who they were becoming together. And slowly, without pressure or expectation, their love deepened and solidified, not as billionaire and former hotel cleaner, but as two people who had found each other across impossible odds and were determined not to let go. 1 year later, as Christmas approached again, the Grand Crystal Hotel was buzzing with anticipation. Reporters lined the front entrance, photographers jostled for position, guests craned their necks, the staff whispered excitedly. Because this time, when the sleek black car pulled up, everyone knew what was coming. Kehinde Adeleke stepped out in a tailored navy suit, elegant but understated, and beside him, holding his hand with quiet confidence, walked Folake in a beautiful pale blue dress, simple flats, and that same silver necklace that had started everything. She didn't cling to him. She didn't perform for the cameras. She simply walked beside him, calm, steady, sure of her place. The headlines the next day read, "The Christmas Miracle, How a Hotel Cleaner Changed a Billionaire's Heart and Changed Everything." But Kehinde and Folake barely noticed. They weren't performing for anyone. They had nothing to prove. They were there for a Christmas charity gala, one that Kehinde had insisted be held in support of community education programs. Programs that Folake not only helped design, but now actively ran, bringing literacy and hope to hundreds of girls across Lagos. Inside the hotel, staff members they both recognized stood frozen. Some bowed respectfully, others looked away ashamed of the whispers they'd once spread. Mrs. Balogun fumbled her clipboard, her expression caught between professional courtesy and genuine shock. Kehinde greeted them all politely, then turned to Folake. "Ready?" She nodded, squeezing his hand once. As the evening progressed, as speeches were made and donations pledged, as the ballroom filled with Lagos's elite and the programs they were supporting were explained in detail, something remarkable happened. People began to see Folake not as the hotel cleaner who got lucky, but as the passionate educator who was genuinely changing lives. They saw her intelligence, her commitment, her vision for creating opportunities for girls from circumstances like her own, and slowly the narrative changed. Later that night, as the ballroom lights dimmed and applause rose for the final presentation, Kehinde stepped onto the stage. He didn't speak about technology or profit margins or market disruption. He simply said, "I once thought success meant building the biggest company, making the most money, achieving the most impressive goals. But someone taught me that real success means seeing people, truly seeing them, not as categories or social classes or economic statistics, but as human beings with inherent worth and extraordinary potential." The crowd fell silent, hanging on every word. He paused, his eyes finding Folake standing near the back of the room, tears streaming down her face, but smiling, really smiling. And he said, And she taught me that the best investments we make aren't in markets or companies, they're in people, in possibilities, in the courage to see beyond what is to what could be. The crowd erupted in applause. People stood. Many were wiping their own eyes. But Folake, standing near the back, wasn't crying from sadness or overwhelming emotion. She was crying from relief, from joy, from the profound experience of being fully seen and fully valued for exactly who she was. After the gala ended, they walked outside hand in hand, leaving the noise and lights behind. No security guards, no entourage, just two people who had found each other in the unlikeliest way. I still think it's funny, Folake said with a genuine laugh, looking up at him in the moonlight. What is, Kehinde asked, smiling down at her, that all of this started, this entire life-changing journey, because I fell asleep in your bed. Kehinde laughed, pulling her close. Best accident of my life. They stood there for a moment, looking out at the city lights that sparkled like scattered stars across Lagos. Somewhere in that vast city, girls were learning to read because of programs they'd built together. Families were being lifted out of poverty through education initiatives they'd funded. Lives were changing because two people from impossibly different worlds had chosen to see past surfaces for something real. Merry Christmas, Folake, Kehinde whispered. Merry Christmas, Folake replied, her voice full of joy and peace. And as they stepped into the night together, they weren't defined by their pasts, not by wealth or poverty, not by social position or expectations, not by other people's limitations or prejudices. They were simply two people who had found each other, chosen each other, and built something beautiful. Not as billionaire and cleaner, but as equals, as partners, as home. Sometimes the greatest gifts arrive in the most unexpected packages. Sometimes love walks in when we're too exhausted to perform. And sometimes a chance encounter on an ordinary day changes absolutely everything. This Christmas, remember, the most valuable treasures in life are never the things we can buy, but the connections we're brave enough to nurture.